Hello and a warm welcome to you all to the first webinar in the eFIRE Finding Clarity and Complexity series. I'm Sally Johansson and will be supporting you during this webinar. Before we start, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You have joined the presentation using your computer speaker system by default. You'll note that we are using a new platform for this series and your video cam and microphone will be showing. Please could you mute your microphone now if it isn't already muted. If you do ask a question live, please ensure that you have no background noise or distractions. The webinar is being recorded and you will receive a copy of the recording and slides and resources for today's session later today. As we use MailChimp for bulk emailing, sometimes emails land in spam or junk, so please check your spam if you don't receive it in case the email has landed there. We would like this session to be as interactive as possible and invite you to submit your text questions in the chat function throughout the webinar. You will find this by hovering over your screen, which will then reveal a taskbar at the bottom. Click on chat and a chat pane will come up where you can enter your question. We will also be having breakout rooms which our presenter, Jeff Abbott, will talk you through at the relevant time. It is now my pleasure to introduce your first speaker, Smaranda Dokia, AC Head of Digital Learning, Events and Conferences.
Hello, everyone. And on behalf of the AC International Global Team, a warm welcome to a new Journey to Coaching Mastery webinar series hosted by the Association for Coaching. Smaranda Dokia here, your host for this series, Head of Digital Learning, Events and Conferences. I am so delighted to have you all with us today on a new learning journey, this time with Jeff Abbott, for the Finding Clarity and Complexity in the Journey to Coaching Mastery webinar series. Just a quick introduction on Jeff. Jeff is the Director of Executive and Organizational Coaching at the QUT Graduate School of Business in Brisbane, Australia. He manages coaching programs, including fostering of coaching as an essential leadership practice in complex environments. He also facilitates and coaches across programs related to leadership coaching, including within the Executive MBA and Corporate Leadership Development programs. Jeff is very active in the global executive coaching as practitioner, educator, researcher, and author. In his role as founder and director of the Center for International Business Coaching, he has a variety of coaching and mentoring engagements with multinational companies with a special interest in Latin America. Jeff's executive experience is with the Special Broadcasting Services in Australia, where he managed strategic planning. He is also a member of the Association for Coaching Global Advisory Board, and co-editor of the Routledge Companion to International Business Coaching. I know that many of you have already participated in our previous webinar series, and I'm honored to have you back. Thank you for being with us today. You know that our programs are generally very interactive. This particular webinar series is going to be even more so. We invite you to join in the discussion or ask your questions throughout the webinar using the chat room available. You will also have the possibility to speak to each other and share experiences in the breakout rooms during the webinars. We will be telling you when that will be the case. So for now, I invite you to go ahead and write your name and your location today so we make sure everything works well and we get a big hello for everyone. That's all on my side at the moment. Welcome, Jeff. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today, and good evening to you, as you're in Australia.
Yeah, thanks very much, Smaranda, and welcome to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to take you through an introduction. We're calling this the title, Playing with eFIRE, Coaching Leaders to Coach Leaders in Messy Times. So it's going to be interesting because virtual technology is always a little bit fun to play with because people are seeing different things at different times, and we sometimes have a little bit of clunkiness around some of our technologies if we're new. And that's not just you, but it's me as well, as we play with not only eFIRE, but the technology. So the welcome, what I'd like you to do is, just to get us started, is to, I notice a few people are coming in. We can see some interesting places, as well as typing in where you're from, but also type something in that you're curious about, and we'll just scroll down and you can keep an eye on the chat room as I'm talking. Because we're interested in eFIRE as a coaching methodology and in driving leadership behaviors, in this idea of curiosity, of noticing things and being mindful as we go. So we start off by me wondering about what you're curious about. So as I'm talking, I'll keep a bit of an eye on what your curiosity is taking you towards. I'm noticing coming in from all sorts of interesting places. I think, interestingly enough, I've got a student here from Australia. I would have thought too much of a good thing, Stuart, but never mind. And we have Manchester, we have all sorts of different places. So this is great. Curious about values, curious about how to use eFIRE coaching model, curious all sorts of things. Edinburgh, interesting. I'm just curious about what's coming in. So today we're going to do the intros, play a little bit with the technology, and if you'd like, if you can work the chat and you're getting a bit stuck with something, if you send a chat through to Smaranda privately, maybe might be one way of handling that. Also, there is capacity for us to do audio as well. I'm not sure, we'll keep an eye on numbers of people, but if there's not that many people, we might stop the slides and have a look at everybody on the screen. So you keep a bit of a number on look at the numbers on the screen, Smaranda, as to how many are coming in. So I want to look at the model. I want to look at an overview of the series, because this is 4 webinars, not just one, of course, and look a bit at the context in which we're talking, remembering that we're talking about leadership and coaching, and we're talking about coaching leaders to use coaching. So we're kind of modeling what we do, and have a little bit of a play, try and put you into some rooms together to have a bit of a chat with each other. One of our experts at work about virtual technologies was concerned that people wouldn't talk in the breakout rooms, and I assured him that a coaching population will, the problem is not getting people to talk, it's stopping them. So be mindful of that. And so this is the model, and we emailed to you a copy of this, and hopefully you will have had a brochure that includes this model and also the questions that relate to it, because in each of the sections of the model, there are a series of around about 11 questions that help us to guide people when we're coaching them through asking some particular questions. There's no magic in the questions, but the thing about the questions is that they're all informed by the evidence base that underpins the model. So very quickly, I'll just run you through it. I won't do a big spiel at the moment about it, but in the middle of this model is energy. And this is where a lot of coaching processes, I'm sure that as coaches, experienced coaches, most of you will be very familiar with the GROW model, which Sir John Whitmore has done such a fantastic job in putting together and anchors a lot of our work in terms of a conversational model. Some people use it, some people vary from it. But one thing that this particular model does is to give attention before we look at goals, is to really embed the idea of energy drives the coaching conversation. Energy drives the coaching conversation, and that comes from values, purpose, and relationships. Then in any conversation, we need to look at framing, and in the context of leadership, we're also looking at the boundaries of the conversation around the way that leaders will need to not just, like executive coaches, we tend to have fairly open slather in some respects, but this is very important in the framing to note the particular responsibilities that leaders have and to understand where the boundaries of the conversation goes, and with this idea of curiosity and creative tension. The model takes us then to inquiry of multiple perspectives and using a variety of different systemic explorations of what's going on. So it's, again, it's a similar approach to GROW, but looking at this systemic and multiple perspectives idea in the system. And then we reflect back. We go back on exciting possibilities using strengths and resources. This is, most of you will be familiar with strength-based change and positive psychology. And just looking at some of these curiosities coming in. Okay. And so when we're looking back, we're going back to the framing, going back to, you can see here, this is a circular model. We can wind back to inquiry and framing, have a look at possibilities. And the important thing is here not to come up with one idea, but this is where we explore. And then the final element there in green is where we talk about experimentation and execution. So it's not way forward or wrap up, although that's partly what it is. But it's this idea that in complex environments, we don't know necessarily what's going to happen. So we have to have a variety of approaches, but we need to be absolutely clear on our intention, so we execute with intention, which is quite important, rather than it's very easy in complex environments for organizations to be in the space, oh, well, we're not too sure what to do, so we might do a bit of this, a bit of that. Well, sure, but you need to have strong intention about why you believe what you do is the right thing. I'll just keep an eye on what's coming in. Okay. Eating our own cooking, meaning that as I'm talking, I'm trying to model, or will be trying to model, the kinds of approaches that eFIRE and the underpinning methodologies, because eFIRE doesn't sit on its own, it's simply a model. It's informed by a lot of other research and practice in coaching that many of you will be familiar with. So we're going to try and practice what we preach here. And the mode is to be serious and playful at the same time. Serious playfulness, John Dewey is my favorite philosopher from the early part of the 20th century. Dewey talked about this idea, very much strong action learner, experiential learning, and being too serious around very serious work that we do is not helpful in terms of our mental acuity. And Paul Brown's work you will be familiar with in terms of neuroscience and looking at what's happening in the brain as we go into intensity. And sometimes we need to pull out and give ourselves time to be more creative and playful in our mental state. So the series, and I'm putting here, the map is not the territory. Another principle we look at in eFIRE is this idea of what's emerging through interaction. In a complex system, you have lots of interactions. So we're not going to be, we've got dates, we've got 4 Tuesdays, 4 dates, 2 weeks apart. And there are some things that we think might happen in those times. And we're clear about the reasons why those four elements are happening. But we're also mindful that if through my interaction with you and your interactions with each other, other things happen, then we'll be guided in turning to different approaches. And I just noticed we've got Brazil coming in as well, which is lovely. Welcome to Rodrigo. And let's keep going. So what I'm going to do is just test something here. We've got in the system the capacity to put you into groups. So what I'd like to do is to have you go into groups. You'll be in a group of 4 or 5, and each person has 30 seconds to share. You can turn your audios on, make sure videos if you've got videos, and say who you are briefly, where you are, which we've already started to see. What are you passionate about? What's 1 or 2 things around your coaching or your work that you're passionate about? And an issue that you'd like to think about with us for 8 weeks. So in other words, what's a coaching challenge in the context of leadership and coaching? At the moment you're grappling with, it could be a problem with that you're facing yourself if you're leading people, or it could also be that it's an issue with a client, that you're working with a client and you'd like to explore that, because we'll use the eFIRE model to work with that. If you're first into the room, you've won the job as timekeeper, so don't slow down, get in there quick, and really honor the 30 seconds, because what we're doing here is doing a couple of things. We're landing technology, we're also interacting, we're starting to play a little bit with each other and getting a sense of who's in the room, and we're also starting to land our issue. We're starting to frame our conversation, what are we trying to think about here, and at the same time we're tapping into our values, into our passions, in terms of being authentic around the energy center of the eFIRE model. And keep an eye on who's in the room, because you won't go back into the same room, but you will be able to keep an eye on who's there. So we should be back. We should be back seeing the PowerPoint. Is that all good with people?
Yes, Jeff, we can see the PowerPoint again.
Good. Okay, so clearly a few people were having a little trouble going in and out of the session. So hopefully when we do that again, we're going to put it into smaller groups, so it'll be a little bit easier to manage. The one thing with the virtual technologies is it's okay if you have a little bit of play and it doesn't work initially the way that you wanted. It's inevitable when you first start with a technology, and certainly I find this myself, that it can be a little bit frustrating. But the thing is to try some things, and this is consistent with the methodology that we're using tonight, to be okay if it doesn't work, to be thinking, okay, well, maybe that time when I went in, it didn't quite work for me because there could be a technical problem at my end, or it could be a technical problem at the other end. But consistent with their methodology, that doesn't really matter. Oops. I think, okay. Righto. Looking at, just go back a little bit here. One of the things that we're talking about in the context of the eFIRE and leadership as coaching is that the model itself is designed for complex organizational environments. And that basically means, and I think most of you would have run into this idea of VUCA. It's volatility, uncertainty, and ambiguity. It's a term by the US military that was termed with the idea of growing interactions and growing lack of understanding really about some of the emergencies that were happening in the world. So maybe if you could put a little note in the chat if you think that you are not experiencing any of that. Maybe if you're very fortunate that you haven't actually had that issue of, I'm having a bit of issue finding the chat room here. Here we go. Let's go back here again.
Hi, Jeff. I have a question from Cecilia, who's curious about how she might try this in the NHS in the UK. Yeah. Possibly the most VUCA organization I've worked in, she says.
Well, it's interesting. We have a similar issue in Australia with Queensland Health, with our health services, which are incredibly complex and issues of emergence within the health systems. This is really perfect. If you're going to work with this particular model, you can work with it at a local level. You can also work with it at a high level, but it's a way of having a conversation. So as I go through explaining a little bit more, we'll get an opportunity to understand some of the ways that it works there. So looking at the next, let me just slide. Just having try. Here we go. One of the when you're looking at the National Health Service or you're looking at any organisation, you have on the left there the official organisational chart, and then on the right you've got the reality, which people tend to experience, which is the mess, the interactions. And when we're looking at a coaching intervention, and also we're looking at the way in which leaders show up, if you look again to the right of the picture there, that really what they're trying to do is work in this VUCA environment in a way which is countercultural to the elegant organizational chart, which is on the left. So what we're trying to do is play with this idea of, sure, we've got our little boxes that we live in, but really there's a different thing going on. And the challenge for executives is to move from drowning in that mess Or to, in Australia, we talk about surfing and getting a surfboard, getting on top of the energy and working with that as you move into these very, very difficult but high energy environments. And again, it comes back to your capacity and certainly, again, thinking about that example of the health service of really being able to see where there's so much passion when I deal with the health departments and I deal with doctors, and we've got a former senior leader in a health service on our Graduate School of Business Board of Advisors. Deep passion and commitment to what they're doing, but often they struggle with this interrelationships and ambiguity and shifts and shortages that happen in the system. I'm just noticing just a technical thing, that if you can't communicate in the breakout session, it might be that your microphone was muted, so keep an eye on the little microphone icon with the red line through. If that's the case, simply click on unmute and that'll fix it. So we're looking at the challenge for executives. This is where this model is in the middle. Again, we come back to energy, and that's really the core, but also encouraging people on the right-hand side through that process of systemic inquiry is to look at the organizational system as a whole, rather than often with the history of coaching is on that one-to-one, which certainly is a lot of it is about one-to-one conversations, but it's also being mindful at the same time of other conversations that are happening and to contextualize the work that you're doing in the nature of the system, which is why the eFIRE model draws us into a process of multiple perspectives. For example, there's, I think, 37 people listening to me. There's about at least 37 voices in the head of interpreting what I'm saying. Hopefully everyone's got just the one, but there may be others going on. So it's a question in the organization of understanding what are those different interpretations. Each of you that went into a breakout room had a different experience. Some of you will be still frustrated that you couldn't communicate. So even though I'm sitting here talking in the same way, there'll be lots of flooding emotions and flooding thoughts and feelings and even behaviors that are happening behind the scenes that are different in every single part of, if we're modeling our little organization here, the VUCA world in a small way is happening right in front of us, which is what I was saying before about as we work together to try and kind of eat our own cooking. Let's have a look. Just have a look at some of the comments. Yeah, that's good. There's lots of interesting things coming. Yeah, some good chat. Okay, so just keep going. Okay, characteristics of the model. That it's an energy-centered model. It's a conversational framework. It's designed for leader coaches, but also coaches that are working with leaders. It's question-based. Doesn't mean that you simply sit there and fire questions, but it means that you are coming from a position of not knowing. And this is the mindset of a leader of coming from a position of curiosity. It means that they let go with the idea that as leaders, their job is to know everything and to be in control of the answer. Because in that organizational mess, nobody knows what's going on entirely. We all have different ideas and different knowledge to create and share. And it engages multiple systems levels. The questions draw people to think about what is happening in the here and now. What is happening between you and I in our interactions? What is happening with above us in our organization? What is happening in our team? What is happening in our department? What is happening in our organization? What is happening in society? That draws us out of this very closed one-to-one. One of the power of coaching, and you'll all, I guess, relate to this, is you give someone the privilege of being there and giving them your attention and concern as one-to-one in a very individual way. But that isn't going to serve them if that's all you're doing, because they live in these contexts which are so complex often that we need to be mindful all the time in asking our questions of what are you experiencing, who else is having a different view, what other conversations can you have, what else is going on, so that the decisions they make in the moment are optimal. It's complexity and systems thinking informed, meaning that this idea of emergence of the system, we talk about the properties of the system, the interactions of the different parts of the system and what comes out of it. as coaches, that's what we're dealing with. It's non-linear. So when we look at that model, and if I can go back again, we don't have to start with F. We don't have to start anywhere, really. We can look at what's going on. You know, that often my coaching question to leaders is, what's happening? How are you going? Just starting with that. And it could show up anywhere. Straight away, I might notice in the room that the energy is low in my interactions with someone, but just asking the question, what's happening, starts to move things. And then through the emergence process, you see what starts to happen. I was introducing one of our coaches who worked on this model to a group of senior executives involved in construction in Queensland. And when I asked her to describe her approach to coaching, she said meandering, which I thought was interesting. So we kind of meander, but at the same time we go in hard. And it's evidence-based. Each of the questions, behind it sits a lot of research and evidence from coaching, from psychology, from economics, behavioral economics, from the social sciences generally. So if you ask the questions where this from, and we've sent you an article that taps into some of these evidence bases, it's not simply a model that was made up. It has behind it the academic rigor and research to support what's going on. Okay, 30 minutes. I'll just keep an eye on my timing. 31 minutes, 25 seconds, Miranda, thank you. Coming back into intentional change. Has anybody heard of Richard Byatsis's work? You want to throw in a yes or a no in the chat room? I'm watching the chat room, so see what's happening. No, there's a no, there's a no, there's a no, there's no, 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 no. This is great, 37 no's. There's a yes. Hello, David. And Stuart, if he's in the class that I was teaching, probably a yes. There's a no, there's a yes. Okay, mostly no. Richard's work is from Case Western University in the United States. He's been around a long time and was particularly prominent in the field of emotional intelligence in coaching and in leadership. He's worked with Daniel Goleman, and some of his more recent work is also they have a neuroscience lab, and they're attaching it to the latest findings in neuroscience and human behavior and emotional intelligence and coaching. And he has a model called intentional change theory. And there's a reference in the article and also a reference in the brochure, the eFIRE brochure, to his work, where he has a model that is very much around the shift from the idea of a goal to the idea of an intention. And when you look at the etymology of the word intention, and it's very small on the slide, but the key difference here or distinction, and one of the MBA students tackled me about this the other day, the distinction, a goal tends to be a slightly harder, shorter term idea, a goal. If you're looking at intention, you go down a level, or I guess you could say you go up a level. And you're looking in there, you can see things like design. So an intention has this concept of design in it, and underneath a desire, and also a stretching out, a straining, exertion, effort, attention. So it's a richer concept than if we're going into goal setting. It could be my goal is to make $100,000. Well, you know, so what? What's the intention behind it? What is the driver? What is the purpose? What is the meaning behind that? And this idea of creative tension, Peter Sengi's work in mastery, of encouraging people, and I'm sure as coaches we're all very familiar with that. So we've got, we don't want to break the rubber band. We don't want to push people from the comfort zone to the learning zone to the terror zone. We want to keep them in a positive state, but without that sufficient tension, the energy isn't there, because the tension drives a lot of the energy. And this idea, there's probably a prize here. So Andrew, you can probably give a minty or something here if someone can work out what the name of that scale is. It actually tells you on the top. It's the Scoville scale for Chile. So if we're encouraging you in your coaching work, when you're working with leaders, to move a little up the Scoville scale, to get a little bit, not maybe the ghost chili is the one that's likely to burn your system, but to move up, to get used to a little heat, and to get the people that you're coaching with a little bit of heat, so it drives the conversation in a way, without at the same time doing it from a level of high care. Maybe I'll just see if there's any questions. If anyone's got any burning questions, Miranda might come in to this at the time, but there's a lot coming in, and if anybody has something that's particularly burning, we can come into Miranda and she can interrupt me and we'll go in, but I'll keep going. David Peterson, who's the Director of Coaching at Google. David's work's very well renowned in the coaching field. Many of you may be familiar with it. He's a psychologist who's one of the top coaches in the United States and in the world, and speaks a lot of conferences. He quotes Eleanor Roosevelt's this idea of do something that scares you each day, and encouraging leaders to move into a process, and this is a little bit of this experimentation in the eFIRE model, of moving into something that's a little less comfortable. And as I think, again, many of you would be familiar, I think, with the idea of an amygdala hijack, where the part of the brain that's the ancient emotional system that protects us, forces us quite quickly into responses of flight and fight, meaning that if we could be overwhelmed, our very smart thinking, we go into a situation with the intention of being calm and cool and collected, and we end up being frustrated, and we get aggressive, or we avoid, we move into unhelpful responses. And the thinking part of the brain, when this happens, literally shuts down. So my capacity to manage technology shuts down when something goes wrong. I tend to be hit by a amygdala hijack, and I tend to make rather less than optimal decisions about which button I push. So again, this is an example of very much in the moment, our ancient system to protect ourselves from lions and tigers and whatever's in the forests is coming in unhelpfully in situations that are actually not life-threatening at all. And the thing about that is that it operates at a organizational level. So you have whole organizations that are in modes of anxiety and fright and flight. So I'm sure that you would have avoided this. And maybe in the chat room, what are some of the behaviors when you've been coaching or leading in organizations? What starts to happen when those organizations, due to external or internal pressures, particularly external, things like mergers and acquisitions? So what are some of the things that start to happen in there? Maybe just put a little bit of, people, Dawn suggesting that that's the other response is freeze. People don't do anything. They just say, oh my God, I'll just do nothing and hope that it all goes away. They safe? Yes, they do. And what do? They go into silos. And siloing is one of the, I don't think there's one executive that has not responded yes when I ask if there's a problem of, boy, look at this. There's hundreds of decision-making based on anecdotal experiences, yes. Stress, lack of clarity, yes. Blaming, yes. Blaming is a really good one in terms of the fight mode. Self-protection, fear of uncertainty, shut down, revert to the way we always, yes, yes, yes. So quickly we can identify with this idea. So the eFIRE model is aiming to help people to step back from this and to anchor a lot of our responses in our own values and our own understanding of ourselves and the world, that in all this mess, we can find some anchors and some certainty, even though we know that it's uncertain. And there's more things coming in. And that's, this idea of retreating to the people who are safe is so countercultural to what we need to do when organizations are under pressure and need to be agile and need to be reacting to the external environment. They need to be looking out when the emotional pressure collectively, individually, is pushing you in. So this is an interesting experience. So the challenge in complexity and under pressure is to harness that energy which is all there, without losing it. And that's why having a really flexible and powerful coaching model that people understand at the connection points, and that leaders are encouraging each other into different kinds of conversations, that's because in organizational systems, the connection points are people. It's like the synapses, a metaphor of the synapses in the brain. If it's firing effectively, but when it gets flooded with cortisone, of course, we get into all sorts of trouble. So we need to have ways of stepping back. And that's why a coaching model that calls to this idea of emotion and values and meaning and purpose is so critical. And it's not about the model. It's not about the model. And this is where I was mentioning earlier on about the idea that it's the mindset with the model and the methodology. It's the mindset. And some of you might be familiar with the idea of a growth mindset. If half of us here of the 37 people had a growth mindset, which means that you believe that your individual skills, capacities, personalities, intelligences, everything could be shifted into a more positive light, and so could your organization, as opposed to a fixed mindset where roughly you say, well, like the Jesuits, you take the boy, the child when he was 7, and you have the man. Well, if you do, Carol Dweck's work says that if you have a belief in the growth of yourself and other people and the world, then you are likely on all the factors of human engagement and success to be more successful than if you have a fixed mindset. So as a leader, encouraging people through coaching approaches to believe in what's possible is able to then generate more productivity and productive energy in response to these things. And mindfulness, I'm sure, as coaching practitioners, mindfulness, Ellen Langer's work on the right, that's Professor Ellen Langer from Harvard, and the link there, which you'll see in the slides when they come to you. Ellen Langer's work, she's been studying in this area for over 30 years, is about noticing things. She talks about mindfulness without meditation, which is an interesting concept. And curiosity, constantly coming from a position of not knowing, I think is a critical thing. And yeah, I'm not sure if each of you has identified what you believe to be your personal value set and your mantra for showing up as a leader, and particularly as a coach, as to what you stand for and what the values that you hold, because those are the things that are going to hold you firm where everything else in these kinds of environments is going haywire. So again, a position of care for yourself and for others, this is part of the mindset of coaching. Without it, the eFIRE model is only a model, and it doesn't have the energy. A little bit there, that's just the growth fixed mindset. I won't hold on to that for the moment. These are in the slides, and you can read about Carol Dweck's work. Coming back to the model, let's have a look in the middle of this. That basically the reason that we believe and that we practice the energy-based approach is very, very rich research from the area of positive psychology and the work of Barbara Fredrickson and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi and Martin Seligman's work that you may know from the book Flourish. Some of you, again, who read around the positive psychology field of the model, the PERMA model, and in green are the two factors that are consistently predictive, more than the others, of predicting deep human happiness, not the kind of quick fix, which is the positive emotion, but sustainable well-being around holding positive relationships, what Richard Byatzis calls resonant or trusting relationships, and finding meaning and purpose in your life, and have it which are anchored in values, human values and personal values, and organizational values is how they connect. So this is why energy is so important. And here are some of the questions that are in the model. Have you managed to get a copy? Has everybody got a copy of the eFIRE model in their email? Could you indicate in the chat room how you're going with that? Yes, yes. Anybody know? There's a no, there's a yes, there's a yes, there's a yes, there's a yes, there's a yes. Okay, all right. Okay. No, no, no. All right, so what I'm going to do is ask you, instead of going back into the chat rooms, because I think there's a bit of hit and miss in the chat room, and in the terms of time, I want to just give a little bit of time for questioning. And if you haven't seen the model, then it's going to be difficult for you to do this fully. But what I want to do next time is give you a little bit more time in the breakout rooms to have some conversations using the eFIRE model and using the questions in the model. And this will become clear as we go. But each of the sections, each of the 5 sections of the eFIRE model has a series of questions. In the article that I sent you, there's a full set of these questions under each of them, and they will guide you at the sorts of things that as a coach and as a leader you might ask when you're in that space. And these are the ones from energy. So what I'd like you to look at, there's 13 questions. I'd like you to pick 2 of those which you think for some reason, for you, and let's use the word energy again, that for you personally have a bit of energy. They're questions that you think, yeah, I wouldn't mind asking that one when I'm in a coaching situation tomorrow or next time I'm in a coaching situation. I'm going to throw this one in just to see what happens. So these are not unusual to you, but maybe type in 2 numbers in the chat room. If you could look at 2 of those that just important, seem to be something about them just triggers your interest. So just read through them. Okay, notice, again, we're curious and we're noticing what is the numbers, as the numbers come in. This is like lotto, isn't it? Like we might win something if we get the right numbers enough times. So it would be good, wouldn't it? Let's see what's coming in. What are we noticing here? Okay. More questions about why, yeah. 12, 13, 13 is getting a lot of go. 6, 13, yeah, we're getting a good spread. Yeah. Interesting. What I noticed there is that there's an enormous spread around. Each of you has picked up some different ones. Now, when you get the, 11's popular, getting a lot of 11s. What is 11? What really matters? Yeah, it's that, it's that if you get a sense of these questions, they're all asking around a similar thing. They're asking you to strip away from all of the clutter and all of the noise that's happening in the environment. Say, well, let's check in here. What's really important to you? And I remember that very few ones. Nice. I remember when I decided to do a PhD that I was going through a series of conversations with my coach, who was Dr. Tony Grant at Sydney University. And he asked me a question. I was saying, well, I couldn't do it. I was saying, okay, well, I can't do it because of a mortgage. I've got responsibilities. I don't know what to do with my job. I've got money, blah, blah, blah. And he simply said, he stopped me. He said, how important is this to you? And he didn't say it in any sort of overbearing way. It was simply a question that was placed in the moment in a way that I don't even know if I asked him. I simply went away and did it because he sensed that there was a lot of, again, we'll use the word energy, a lot of something going on for me around this. And he just had to ask the question at the right time. Very simple, no over-explaining. And then we found the power of that when I simply realized for myself that it was time to do it. And as a few further up the page, there was a couple of 13s. There was, if you were having, I quite like, if you were having fun, what would be happening? What would be doing? How would you be? It's that calling people into lightness, even in the idea of, getting people moving and getting people playing is a very good way to move things around in conversations. So let's keep going. So we've got that. We could do a breakout room, but what I'd like to do in the short time we have left, There's a list here of a book by Zender and Stinnett from The Extraordinary Coach that gives lots and lots of different reasons why leaders should be coaching. So your job as coaches is to constantly be looking for opportunities, using the eFIRE model, using your own models that can fit within this same framework, to encourage people that not just coaching them, but taking opportunities to help them to coach others. So you're getting this system moving through modeling conversations. But of course, we do have a certain skepticism about the power of this stuff as coaches. We want to be very optimistic, but at the same time, that paradoxical position, and we'll deal later on with the idea of paradoxical thinking in eFIRE, of at the same time believing of high optimism that something great's going to happen, but at the same time pulling back a little and being a bit skeptical, because remember, in multiple perspectives, there's a real opportunity for lots of people to believe their truths and all those truths to be somewhat different. And for you in your coaching is the work of this is a quote from a poet, Antonio Machado, that David White, the Irish-English poet who works in corporate life as well. He says, "Wanderer, there is no road. The road is made by walking. By walking, one makes the road." So in eFIRE, the people that are involved need to walk. They need to understand that there is, in these environments, in these organizations, there isn't necessarily an obvious pathway. And it's only through experimentation, but intentional action, remembering this little bit of play between experimentation and intention and execution, that you need to make the path by walking. You need to actually do something and to establish a pathway that wasn't there before. So what I'd like you to have a go at, we've only got a few minutes left. What I'd like you to have a go at is to, in between sessions, is to spend a few minutes reflecting on the material we've covered. Obviously, read the eFIRE brochure, read the article that we're sending as well. Identify what has been your key insight in terms of so far, in terms of tonight. Decide just one thing that you might do differently as a result of the insight. Contact a coaching friend to exchange ideas by email or to have a discussion. So find somebody else in your network, even from tonight, that you might have run into online, and we haven't yet had a chance to really do that as much as we could have with a little bit more time. But start to use eFIRE in your day-to-day work. So when you get the model, start to play. You don't need to be fully conversant with the whole thing. You can start right now with the model and share eFIRE with others. It's a mindset of abundance. So you can share this model with other people. And for next time, if you could go into click on that site that we give you, and you can do a little experiment of, and again, this is in the inquire part of eFIRE, of exploring some part of an organization or an organization with which you're familiar, that you can then start to do a little survey to see where they're at in this idea of a coaching culture. So what we're doing is helping people to understand that coaching doesn't only happen from coaches. You can get organizations start to move in a way that people are having conversations as though it was coaching. So I'm going to stop the sharing for the moment. And I've just lost my chat room. There it is. Okay. And what I would really encourage you to do is next time we come in together is make sure, if you could, you have that video nice and active. That would be great, because it would be helpful to see each other and get a sense of where you are and where you weren't. And we've got 5 minutes left. And in that time, I mean, I can talk probably, it's now almost 11 o'clock in the evening in Brisbane, but I'm fairly keen on this material. I could probably keep going till breakfast time if you'd like me to just keep talking, but I won't. So what I really like to get is a question. Okay. So what questions might you have? And I'm quite happy to bring people in with some audio if they'd like to come and have a chat to the group. We've got a good number. It's good to see a few videos coming on. Maybe, yeah, even some, how can junior staff help unstuck a leader? That's very interesting. This is something that it depends, of course, on the context that you're in, but it is through conversation, it is through being very conscious as a junior member of staff. What are the kinds of conversations you are having with that person? And because you can only, as we know, as coaches, we can only change ourselves. It's very difficult to change someone else, particularly if those people are fixed or appear to be fixed. But be curious, be very mindful yourself. And the eFIRE model is based on curiosity, meaning looking around the room tonight, I'm on an understanding that I don't know how you're thinking. So what I'm aiming to do when I'm coming from this mindset is to understand the different ways that that person might be thinking. So as a junior member of staff, challenging myself to let go of blaming that person for being stuck and ask myself, well, how am I seeing this, or how could I see it differently? And what might be the issues that that person's dealing with, and how might I influence the system so that that person has an opportunity to move in a different way if in fact that's in their interest to do so. Because of course my view of the world, I might see the person as stuck. I wonder how they view me. When I get people say, oh, so-and-so doesn't get it, my question is, well, what don't they get? So it's throwing it back into a reflection of the multiple perspectives that are happening in organizational life. If someone's stuck and they're unproductive, it's not because they want to be stuck or they want to be unproductive. It's because of the condition that they're in, that happens to be the condition. If we have a growth mindset, we believe that that's likely to happen in a different way if the conditions are different. Okay.
Hey, Geoff.
Yes.
I'm aware of the time here, and we have a couple of minutes left.
Yes.
So maybe one last question.
Okay. How do you, if they don't have, do you think people, I guess it's a question. I mean, my sense is, given the opportunity, people will work in this mode. Most people will love the opportunity to work in this mode. And it's a question of allowing them to, firstly, modeling the power of it in your own conversations with them, and then to allow them, even ask them the question, well, what's the conversation been like for us? And how might you set up conditions for those kinds of conversations to happen somewhere else? It's the viral approach. And of course, people have different levels of influence in organizations, but start where you are. I mean, that's the best that you can do, I think. And but it's infectious. It really is. Okay.
Okay. Well, I guess it's been very interesting, and we look forward to hearing from everyone with some feedback. We will be sending all the documents that Geoff was mentioning in the beginning at some point during the session. We'll resend this along with the recording and other resources, because we saw that some of you haven't received it. You said you haven't. Please do check your spam. Sometimes our emails, since we are using email system, sometimes the emails get into the spam, so please do check your spam in case it landed there. And you will be receiving from us the recording of this session, so if you want to come back to that, and then other resources from Geoff, and we'll meet again soon in 2 weeks' time.
Great, and if I could encourage you to, you can use Zoom for free. if you could set up a conversation within the next 2 weeks with somebody that you like to talk to, and see if you can play with Zoom. Get your cameras working, get your microphones working. So next time you come in, we'll be able to play again a little bit more differently, a little bit differently. So it's been fantastic to start, and I look forward to continuing with you.